We know that Sandplay therapy is a journey, it's a process. It follows the hero's journey that Campbell would tell you more about if he were here today.
Sandplay is a wonderful modality for working on a non-rational, non-verbal level. And I have found it tremendously useful for children and adults and for people wanting to work with their own creative process.
If you've ever experienced walking on a beach, then you know you've got the sand beneath you, you've got the land to one side, you've got the ocean and the water to one side. And it's a liminal world. It is a place in between, yet together all at the same time. It is fluid itself, but yet it is solid. And it behaves in ways that lend itself to expression using our hands. It connects us with nature, it connects us with the ground we walk on, the air we breathe, each other, and it lends itself to expressive maneuvers in the sand.
Wow. I'm from a university in Tennessee, and I'm studying psychology, and so we were asked to kind of job shadow a therapist that covers a realm of therapy we're not that familiar with, and I chose Sandplay. Like, you hear the word sand and play and you can kind of make your own idea, but I knew that there would be something so much deeper to it, and I was just really curious about that.
I would say that psyche and body are one, inseparable. And so if you're working with one, you're working with the other. And the beauty of Sandplay is you're working with both at the same time. So it's a natural channel to tap, particularly for people working with trauma in their life.
It is an expression. And although it's called play, it's not play in the same way as play therapy. It's not the same as doing batakas or even playing a game or that interaction with the therapist that happens so much in play therapy. It's really an individual technique in many ways.
Say it's a three-dimensional art therapy that gets at things that talking can't get to. And it brings up the healing power of the unconscious.
Well, it's a tray of sand, of course, and you've got all kinds of figures to choose from, and so you can create what's going on inside you or outside you, whatever, or anything else you choose. You can create it in the sand by putting the figures together in the sand, and you can use dry sand or wet sand.
Sandplay for me, it just every time I do is some new discovery, and every patient comes has a very different, each very individual kind of presentation in a story or whatever, even the children or the elderly people who have the brain syndrome or whatever, you know. Sandplay is really based on Jungian psychology, you know, the analytical psychology, because just like a dream, its focus is the images. And so that's how people express themselves in the symbolic images, and also how do you call body sense of, you know, felt sense of whatever.
I think I would have trouble picking just a few things, because a lot of things remind me of childhood, and then it's like deciding what you want to play out, because so many things remind you of different parts of yourself.
And what happens with symbolic language is that when we activate, when we pick up a symbol and we utilize a symbol is alive with meaning, as Jung would say. And it helps, there's all of these different meanings that it holds. Like this flower, it could take me to a wedding, it could take me to a graveside, it could take me to a spring day that brings back, you know, good feelings inside my body. So symbols have multiple meanings. They also hold the tension of the opposites, and they transcend the tension of the opposites because they're so alive with meaning. So when we use symbolic language, it frees us up. We could get so stuck in one pathway, and symbolic language helps us activate many ways of thinking and believing.
I understand symbolic language as representing archetypes, and archetypes are sources of energy that are cross-cultural. They exist in many cultures. As a person looks at the figures on the shelf, they're drawn to that archetypal energy, whether it be in an animal, whether it be in a person.
You know, like a Godzilla and mixed with Godzilla and dinosaur, and it has one horn. And quite often people use this, even the adult. This kind of creature could be more like a monstrous, but it's suffering, like a shadow figure, sort of, from suffering, wanting to become a human, but not quite, you know. This is a turtle, green turtle with a lily. So this is symbol of self. Jung says we all have in the center of inner conscious, unconscious put together. There is organizing function that capital S has.
So when you see someone do their scene in the sand, how you, as the therapist, how can you tell what's going on in their brain as opposed to their images, or do you even try to understand it?
From a Jungian perspective, where I see the ego and the self as connected or disconnected, I see where certain issues are trapped, where they're cut off. I see a progression, for the most part, in most people that are not too traumatized. I see those issues resolving, becoming more integrated, so that the personality is more balanced.
What we are learning in neuropsychology, Sandplay has known all along and has tapped into this deep healing process that actually changes the brain and integrates the nervous system and brings forth transformative healing. It was through the touching, seeing, doing, the manipulating with the hands and the senses that the individuals were able to tap into body, creative energies, emotions, and through these emotional experiences, then they began to think of things they could do differently. It went into the cognitive realm. And so this loop goes from, senses to limbic, brainstem, up, over into right parietal, then over to the left to now give meaning and purpose to that sensory experience. And this is how change happens. It's through that sensory system. So in Sandplay, the multisensory experience activates lower centers of the brain that are activating our traumatic responses. Then the self-healing response is that inborn journey. It's that inborn capacity that we have to heal ourselves. And so Jung called it the individuation process. And the neurobiology is that while we're seeing that, there is a deep neurointegration process happening. The brain is integrating. So on a neural level, neurobiological level, that's neural integration. And I think what's most important is the center of the loop, and that's the attuned therapist. That all of this is taking place, not somebody just playing in the sand. This is taking place in the context of relational safety and a generously attuned therapist.
How do you typically guide your sessions? Like, is it something you let, like, I guess, for instance, when we talked about the silent sessions, like, do you say anything, or do they just say, you wait for them to say something first? Like, how do you guide a session typically?
The beauty of the Sandplay is that they're working non-verbally. So it gives them a chance to be more focused about what's going on inside them versus talking, because I think the talking takes them away. This technique that comes from the inside rather than coming from the outside.
And the practice of listening is the way that we can listen on all those levels. They're always present with us, but we're finally beginning to be able to think about them.
There is a dimension that the nonverbal work brings that I think enhances one's own pursuit of one's own individuation process.
When you make the descent into doing that depth work, you've got to keep an anchor. You've got to stay grounded, and that's largely the role of the therapist, to hold and anchor you so you don't get lost.
It's a very different experience to be doing it witnessed by someone who is with you.
It's about that relational holding, so that we're not only, we're grounding ourselves, we're connecting with being in ourselves in order to connect with that in the other. So it's like my connection to the self or being connects with your connection to the self and being.
The self, which is of course the center of the universe, the internal center of us, that gets to have a part.
How much do you read into the fact that it's a form of raw therapy? Like I say, raw therapy, as in it's literally sand, like from the earth. So do you feel like that has a huge component, or do you think mostly us being able to use our own imagination is a bigger draw to the therapy?
As soon as someone uses their hands to reach for a symbol on a shelf, there's an action and a reaction to that piece, that symbol in itself. And then when they take it in a secondary way into the sand, they're taking it into another sensate environment. And I really do think from their fingers in their hand and then to the sand becomes a very energetic experience.
It's not something you know with your head, but you feel it in your heart very deeply, and you're touched, and that's the healing.
For children, it oftentimes releases a sense of spontaneity back into their lives, a relaxed state of being, a place to work out maybe inner conflicts. For adults who perhaps are carrying a level of trauma or a level of conflict, they're able to see it in a more externalized way and to be able to actually begin to work with it in a way that allows them to feel they have either more control or a new way of seeing something or making something kind of happen in a different way than what their previous experiences have been. If someone brings symbols, images to the sand, then what does it begin to feel like, look like? How does that begin to kind of move in them and in the room? I can see that there's a level of movement that kind of begins to constellate in their sense of being, in their outward world, and they're being carried on the unconscious in a different way as well. In other words, maybe what they used a month ago isn't what they might use a month later, but there's something that's kind of growing, moving, changing. There's not a static held place. It begins to release. In other words, our unconscious, whatever we define it as, or wherever things come from, have a way of coming up into an enlivened state. They have to cross over into this place that we're holding, which is a sand tray, and they have to kind of come into life there. And that crossing over place is what I think is as the metaphorical kind of bridge between the unconscious and the conscious. And when that can come forth, I think there's a healing moment in that.